Rain made a steady, patient sound over Briar Hall, as if the sky had accepted what the family had not. The roof was losing. In the west corridor, a line of copper bowls sat beneath dark water stains, each one catching drips at its own rhythm. Sienna Clark crossed between them with a ledger tucked under one arm and a pencil behind her ear, counting the drops the way she counted everything, quietly, accurately, because no one else would. The estate had once been spoken of with pride. Briar Hall, with its oak woods and terraced gardens and mill by the river, had fed half the valley and hosted half the county. Now, the east wall had ivy growing into its mortar. 2 tenant cottages needed chimneys rebuilt before winter, and the wages for stable hands were 9 days late. Again. Sienna pushed open the old steward's office and set down her ledger on a desk, scarred by decades of men who had signed their names like ownership was a birthright. She opened the cash book, then the rent roll, then the stack of unpaid invoices held together by blue ribbon gone grey at the edges. Coal, feed, lime wash, physician's account. At 26, she knew every figure in Briar Hall's ledgers, the way some women knew dance steps. She knew which fields could tolerate one more season of barley before needing rest, which tenants always paid after market day, which supplier would grant 14 days if spoken to in person and never in writing. She knew, with a hard knot of certainty beneath her ribs, that if she could formally direct the accounts for 6 months, she could pull the estate back from the edge. She also knew she would never be allowed. Still in there. Her mother's voice came from the doorway, cool, controlled, and almost bored. Miriam Clark stood immaculate in slate wool despite the damp air, gloves buttoned, hair pinned so tightly it seemed painful. Widowhood had sharpened her into angles. There was no softness left in her expression unless another person of rank could see it. Sienna rose. "I'm reconciling the arrears." Miriam moved into the room and glanced at the open books without really seeing them. "Mr. Bell calls at noon. You will change before then." Sienna kept her hands flat on the ledger to hide that she was gripping it. "I thought he came last week." "He did. He remains interested, which is fortunate for us." Miriam looked directly at her now. "You will be agreeable." Mr. Bell, local banker, widower, 12 years older, with a careful smile and hands always dry and cold. He spoke of marriage as if discussing interest rates. He called Sienna sensible stock. He looked at Briar Hall's acreage the way a butcher examined a carcass. "I have no wish to marry him," Sienna said. Miriam's expression did not change. Wish has very little place in this household. Then, because she always chose the exact pressure point and pressed, she added, "Doctor," Fenton wrote this morning, "your brother's treatment will continue at the current schedule if his account remains current. You understand?" Sienna's throat tightened. Toby had begun coughing blood last winter. He was 19, all elbows and earnestness, with ink stains on his fingers and lungs that seemed determined to fail him. He was boarding in Tunbridge Wells for clean air and supervised rest, because the village doctor had said plainly, if they wanted him alive by spring, they needed specialist care. Miriam continued, voice flat as a clerk reading terms. "I am paying for his care. I am preserving your father's house from creditors. In return, you will be practical." She turned toward the door, then paused. "Romance is expensive, Sienna." When she was gone, Sienna stood in the damp-smelling office and stared at the columns of numbers until they blurred. Her inheritance existed on paper only, a modest trust from her father's sister, meant for her independence, locked under terms Miriam controlled until marriage or 30. 6 years left. 6 years Toby did not have if the money stopped. At noon, She received Mr. Bell in the morning room and listened while he praised Prudence and said he admired women who understood duty. He did not ask what she admired. He did not ask if she had hopes beyond duty. By the time his carriage rolled away, rain had thickened, and Sienna felt as if she'd been measured for a cage. She escaped back to the steward's office with wet hems and no appetite, where figures were at least honest in their cruelty. By candlelight, she drafted payment priorities in her own hand. Physician first. Mill wages second, roof tar, if any left. She could save one thing at a time. Perhaps that was all survival ever was. By the next rain-soaked morning, wind drove rain against Briar Hall's mullioned windows, and the house groaned in all its old bones. Sienna was adding up tenancy arrears when the butler appeared with a tray and a letter propped against the teapot. "From Hartwell and Price, miss," he said, then lowered his voice. "Marked urgent." Hartwell and Price represented the lending syndicate in London, the men who had folded Briar Hall's debts into instruments no one in the valley fully understood and everyone feared. Sienna broke the seal. The paper was thick, expensive, and merciless. Final demand. Arrears outstanding to be settled within 6 weeks of receipt. Failing remittance in full or approved restructuring, the syndicate will exercise rights of liquidation over all secured estate assets, including but not limited to main house, tenant properties, and Briar Mill leasehold. 6 weeks. Not 6 months to negotiate harvest, not a season to improve yields. 6 wet autumn weeks. Liquidation meant selling parcels to outsiders who would cut and strip. It meant tenants turned out with little notice. It meant the mill wheel stilled, 52 workers without wages, the valley's breadline starting at their own gate. Her fingers left damp marks on the page. She took the letter to Miriam in the blue drawing room, where her mother sat writing notes for a charity committee she never attended. Miriam read it once and set it aside with maddening calm. As expected. As expected? Sienna stared at her. They can force sale of the cottages, of the mill. Miriam lifted one shoulder. Then we secure stability before 6 weeks pass. Mr. Bell has already indicated he would consider extending favourable terms if family ties were formalised. Sienna felt heat rise in her face. "You would trade the valley for my engagement?" "I would prevent catastrophe," Miriam said. "Do not dramatise. We can renegotiate the leases. We can offer timber futures from North Copse. We can—" "This is men's business." Miriam's voice snapped like a ruler on knuckles. "You keep household books. You are not to write to lenders, brokers, or solicitors. You are not to interfere." Sienna looked at her mother, at the polished calm, at the hands that held every key. Funds, signatures, Toby's doctor. She understood then that pleading would not move anything. Stone did not yield because rain asked politely. A knock sounded from the passage that same morning. The housekeeper entered, slightly breathless. "Beg pardon, madam. There's a man at the service gate asking for work. Says he can do grounds and repairs. Name of Jonah Reed." Miriam sighed, irritated by interruption. "In this weather?" "He says he came from Ashford on foot." Miriam glanced at Sienna, then at the rain lashing the windows. "If he'll work for board and low wages, put him with the gardeners for a week. We can dismiss him after." Sienna followed the housekeeper back through the corridor, more to escape the drawing room than from interest. At the service gate she found a man standing under the dripping stone arch, hat in hand. He was broad-shouldered, coat soaked dark, jaw shadowed from a day's beard. His boots were clean despite the mud. Military stitched, expensive once though, weathered now. He stood too straight for a labourer asking favours, and when he spoke, his vowels were careful, educated, only roughly sanded down. "Ma'am," he said to Sienna, mistaking her for authority, and then seeming to realise his error by the cut of her dress. I'm Jonah Reed. I can mend walls, clear drains, set hedges, and keep my head down. Can you thatch? Sienna asked. Aye, badly first day, passably second. Despite everything, the corner of her mouth twitched. Honest, at least. He glanced past her toward the dark shape of the hall. Heard you might need extra hands before the rains worsen. Something in the way he said it made her look twice. Most drifters asked where to sleep. This one looked at the gutters and gables like he was calculating load and runoff. We do, she said. You'll report to Mr. Pike at dawn. His gaze returned to her face. Grey eyes, intent. And you, miss? I keep accounts. Then you know where the leaks truly are. Before she could answer, he touched 2 fingers to his brow in thanks and followed the housekeeper inside. That night, after the household settled and corridor lamps burned low, Sienna unlocked the small escritoire in her room. She laid out 3 sheets of cream paper, 1 old cipher book, and the final demand letter. She had learned codes from Toby when they were children playing spy in nursery corners. Later, she'd adapted the habit for practical privacy. Substitution keys tucked into recipes, initials masking names, numbers replacing vulnerable words. She was not naive enough to think paper stayed private once sent, but she could at least force a reader to work for her meaning. She lit a second candle and began. To Messrs. Banbury and Hale, commodity brokers, London. Sir, I write on behalf of a private investor with an interest in the continuity of operations at Briar Hall Estate. Subject to discretion, my principal is prepared to discuss forward timber contracts from certified woodlots at favourable scale, contingent upon immediate bridge financing. She paused, hearing Miriam's voice. You are not to interfere. And then Toby's cough in memory, raw and helpless. She kept writing. By morning she had drafted 3 letters, 1 to brokers for timber futures, 1 to a solicitor in Canterbury regarding emergency lease restructuring under tenancy protections, 1 to a grazing syndicate that had previously sought access to South Meadows. None bore her name. At breakfast, Miriam read the newspaper while Sienna buttered toast she did not eat. Mr. Bell calls again Friday, Miriam said without looking up. He prefers a brief engagement. Sienna set down the knife carefully. Friday is market settlement. I'll be in the accounts office. You will be in the drawing room. Why? The word slipped out before she could smooth it. So he can inspect what he's purchasing. Miriam lowered the paper. So he can rescue what your father mismanaged and you cannot maintain with arithmetic. There it was, the wound and the weapon in 1 sentence. Sienna rose before anger made her reckless. If you'll excuse me. In the service corridor, she nearly collided with Jonah Reed, carrying a coil of rope and a toolbox. Sorry, miss. He stepped back. Mr. Pike says the west drains are blocked solid. We'll flood the lower kitchen if it keeps up. I know, she said automatically. The culvert by the U-walk collapsed last spring. He blinked, surprised. That's so. Might explain why the Northfield holds water too long. It was tile drained in 1889. If the outflow's silted, you'll lose root depth. For a second, they simply looked at each other. 2 people speaking the same practical language in a house where that had become rare. Jonah shifted the toolbox in his hand. You should be the one giving orders. I'm not permitted. His mouth tightened just briefly. Pity. He went on toward the yard, boots ringing on stone. Sienna stood watching him go, unsettled by how quickly he saw what others denied for convenience. By midweek, replies began to arrive, cautious, but not dismissive. Banbury and Hale requested projected yields and proof of authority. The Canterbury solicitor asked for current encumbrance details and offered a consultation by wire if confidentiality could be assured. The grazing syndicate was interested in auction terms if access roads were guaranteed. Sienna built the scaffolding of a rescue in margins and midnight hours, translating hope into figures, figures into terms, terms into days bought against collapse. She hid the correspondence in a locked ledger case beneath spare blankets in her wardrobe. She told no one. On Thursday afternoon, she rode out under a low sky to collect rent statements from the mill clerk and saw what failure would cost in faces, not numbers. Mrs. Della from Cottage Row, flour dust on her sleeves, asked if rumours were true that London men were coming. The blacksmith's wife looked away while her son clung to her skirt. Two men from the wheelhouse stopped talking when Sienna passed, hats in hand, waiting for an answer she had no right to give. At Briar Mill, the wheel churned river water into power with a groan like old muscle. If that sound stopped, so did wages. So did bread at 8 kitchen tables before week's end. Sienna returned to the hall with mud on her hem and certainty like iron in her spine. That evening she found Toby's latest letter on her tray, the handwriting shaky but cheerful by force. Dr. Fenton says my lungs are stubborn as nettles. I told him it runs in the family. Don't let mother bully you into anything idiotic. Sienna laughed once, then pressed the page to her mouth until the laugh became something else. At 10 o'clock she went to her desk, unlocked the case and took out clean paper. Outside, rain moved across Briar Hall in silver sheets. Inside, a daughter no one trusted with decisions sharpened a pen and wrote terms that might save them all. At the bottom, she signed, in a neat, deliberate hand, C. Ash acting for a private investor. She blotted the signature once, closed her eyes and listened to the rain strike the window like thrown pebbles. Then Sienna folded the letter, sealed it with plain wax, and marked the front in an unremarkable hand. For forwarding at first post. She did the same with the other two. By the time she slid the packet into the false bottom of her work basket, the candle had burned low enough to gutter. She pinched out the flame and sat in darkness, letting her pulse slow. In the corridor beyond her door, floorboards creaked once, someone crossing to bed or to listen. At Briar Hall, privacy was mostly a matter of luck. At dawn, she was in the steward's office before breakfast, composing a clean schedule of legitimate household payments in case anyone asked what she had been doing. Coal, partial. Flour deferred 3 days. Stable wages split into 2 disbursements with apologies. A knock sounded on the half-open door. Jonah Reed stood there, hat damp, hair still wet from the yard pump. Mud streaked one sleeve. "Mr. Pike says we'll need limestone and pipe lengths for the culvert," he said. "No funds in the maintenance box." "Of course there aren't." She pulled the expense ledger toward her, flipped pages, did the arithmetic. "Take this to Fenwick's yard in the village. Tell him I'll settle 14 days after Michaelmas market." Jonah didn't take the note immediately. His gaze dropped to the neat columns, then to her face. "He won't agree at 14. He will if I include the old wheel brace account his father owes us from 1912 and politely imply I've found the receipt." A beat. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "Remind me never to owe you money. You may go before I decide to charge consulting fees." He took the note, but lingered at the door. "Northfield ditch gave way in the night. I'm walking boundaries afternoon, see what else is failing. If you want a report." No one had asked if she wanted a report in years. "Yes," she said, "I do." She posted the letters through a chain of caution that would have looked absurd to anyone who had never been trapped. One to the grocer's nephew with a penny to drop at Tunbridge instead of the village box. One slipped into a packet of seed invoices going to Canterbury. One sent by railway post under a copied trade, heading from an old estate circular. By afternoon, wind had shifted east and the rain came colder. Sienna stood under the eaves near the kitchen yard while Jonah and 2 boys wrestled brush from a choked drain. He worked without wasted motion. Sleeves rolled, forearms roped with effort, giving instructions that were direct and calm, never shouted, never padded with status. The boys listened to him faster than they listened to Mr. Pike. When he hauled up a rusted length of tile and held it out, she recognized the maker's stamp. "Bromley Kiln," she said. "That run was replaced 30 years ago." "You remember all of it?" he asked. "I remember what I'm allowed to touch." Something crossed his face then, a flicker too brief to name. Anger, maybe, not at her. At dusk he brought her the boundary report, written in block letters on scrap paper cleaner than most labourers ever kept. "You walk culvert. Partial collapse. North Copse track impassable for timber wagons in heavy rain. Tenant fence at Della Line breached. Old steward's room lock broken. Door won't hold." Sienna looked up at the last line. "Broken recently?" "Couldn't say. Hinges are rotten, but there are stacks of account books in there getting damp." Her pulse jumped. "Show me." They took a lamp down the rear passage, through a narrow door half hidden behind moth-eaten coats. The old steward's room smelled of mildew, ink, and neglect. Shelves leaned under ledgers wrapped in cracked leather, maps curled in tubes by the fireplace. Deed packets sat in a tin trunk, spotted with rust. Sienna set the lamp on the desk and ran her fingers over familiar labels. Tithe rents, 1906. Woodland cuts, 1918. Tenant claims, unresolved. "Mother said these were destroyed," she murmured. Jonah tested the warped window catch and forced it shut against the damp. Either someone lied or someone forgot. At Briar Hall, those are often the same thing. He gave a low huff that might have been a laugh. Together, they lifted ledgers out of the wettest corner and stacked them near the hearth. On instinct, they moved in rhythm, her finding dates and relevance, him choosing what could be dried and what would mould through by morning. Their shoulders bumped once in the tight space. Neither moved away quickly. When she reached for a map tube on the top shelf, her sleeve slipped. His hand steadied her elbow without ceremony. Warm, rough palm. Immediate release. "Sorry," he said, "it's fine." It wasn't fine. It was dangerous in ways she could not add up. From the corridor came the sharp click of heels. Miriam's voice crisp as a blade. "Sienna?" Sienna stepped away from Jonah and lifted a random ledger as cover by pure reflex. "In here." Miriam appeared at the threshold, eyes taking in the room, the labourer, the lamp, the disorder. "What are you doing in this dust heap?" "Recovering records before they rot." "Leave that to clerks." "We haven't had a clerk in 2 years." Miriam ignored that. Her attention settled on Jonah. "Mr. Reed, this is not your assignment." "No, madam," he said, expression blank. "Then return to it." He dipped his head and passed into the corridor without looking back. Miriam waited until his steps faded. "You will not linger in storage rooms at dusk with hired men." Sienna set the ledger down. He was carrying boxes. "You were forgetting your place." 1,000 replies rose and died in Sienna's throat. Inheritance, brother, doctor's invoices. She swallowed all of them. At dinner, Miriam spoke pleasantly of weather and committee lists, as if the exchange had never happened. At the end, she said, "Mr. Bell comes tomorrow. You will wear the blue silk." Mr. Bell came. Mr. Bell sat. Mr. Bell explained, over tea gone cold, how a prudent marriage could stabilize perceptions among creditors. He spoke to Miriam about leverage and confidence and family alignment, then turned to Sienna with a smile, polished like coin. "I trust you understand the urgency, Miss Clark." Sienna folded her hands in her lap until her knuckles ached. "I understand urgency very well, Mr. Bell." That night, a wire arrived from Banbury and Hale. Yield estimates received, stop terms possible. If title authority verified stop, require representative meeting. Canterbury Monday, stop. A second message followed from the Canterbury solicitor, this one by messenger and marked private. If C. Ash could provide evidence of operating control and collateral schedule, he could draft a temporary restructuring framework enforceable against predatory liquidation clauses. Operating control, she had none. Collateral schedule, though, she could build that from the old steward's ledgers if she worked fast. For 3 nights, she slept in fragments, copying figures by candlelight, cross-checking woodland parcels with drainage viability, calculating what timber could be cut without destroying spring regrowth. Jonah began appearing at odd moments with exactly what she needed without being asked. A dry board to prop maps on, twine for bundling records, a repaired lock for the steward's door. Once, near dawn, she found him outside with a lantern while mist lay low over the kitchen garden. She had ink on her fingers and no bonnet. "You're up early," he said. "I'm up late." He nodded toward the rolled maps under her arm. "Walking fields?" "Assessing what can be promised without lying." "Good rule." He fell into step beside her as if it were ordinary. They crossed wet grass to the rise above North Copse. The valley below still held pockets of sleeping fog. The mill wheel turned, faint and steady. "Here," he said, crouching by a stand of ash and oak. "These 3 lines can be thinned now. Keep the younger growth. And if you clear this track, wagons can load even in rain." Sienna stared. "You know woodland management." "Picked it up. Where?" "A lot of places." He said it lightly, but the answer was a wall. She let it stand. When she slipped on the slope, he caught her hand and held it a breath too long before releasing. Neither mentioned it. The silence between them changed anyway. It broke on a Tuesday afternoon. Sienna had just returned from the village post with 2 replies tucked inside her glove when she saw Miriam waiting in the steward's office, one elbow resting on the desk as if it belonged to her by right. In her hand was a letter Sienna recognized at once by the fold. Miriam did not look up immediately. "Interesting initials," she said. "C. Ash." The room went very still. Sienna closed the door behind her. "Where did you get that?" "From the outgoing tray your maid left unattended for 11 seconds. Miriam lifted the page. "Your cipher is clever. Not clever enough." A cold wave moved through Sienna's chest. "You had no right." "I have every right where this family is concerned." Miriam set the letter down with precise care. "You have been writing brokers, solicitors, grazing syndicates under a false identity, forging authority, exposing us to ridicule and legal risk." "Saving us," Sienna said, voice shaking despite herself. "I have been saving us." Miriam laughed once without humour. "You have been playing at power." She stepped closer and her tone flattened into the one Sienna feared most, administrative, detached, final. "You will surrender all correspondence tonight. You will send retractions under my dictation in the morning. You will announce your engagement to Mr. Bell by Friday." "No." Miriam's eyes hardened. "Then Dr. Fenton's account will not be paid this month." The threat landed exactly where intended. Toby's face flashed before Sienna, thin, smiling by effort, ink-stained fingers trembling over a pen. "You would do that to your own son?" "I would do what preserves this household." Miriam smoothed her glove. "Do not mistake sentiment for governance." Sienna gripped the back of a chair to stay upright. "You can't keep control forever." 6 years, Miriam said, "until your trust releases, unless you marry first. I suggest the quicker route." She moved to the door, then paused. "And keep your distance from Mr. Reed. Staff gossip is already tiresome." When she was gone, Sienna sank into the steward's chair and pressed both palms over her eyes, until stars burst in the dark. By evening, the pressure had multiplied. Her cousin Delia arrived from Bath with 3 trunks, 2 hat boxes, and the kind of brightness that entered rooms before she did. Delia was pretty in the way portraits approved of: pale satin skin, glossy chestnut hair, a laugh pitched for crowded drawing rooms. She embraced Miriam theatrically, kissed Sienna's cheek in passing, and surveyed Briar Hall like an audience. "My dears," she said over supper, "I came the moment I heard there was concern. One does hate financial unpleasantness in autumn." Miriam's smile turned almost soft. "Your support is a comfort." Delia lowered her voice just enough to be intimate, not enough to be private. "Well, I do know 1 or 2 gentlemen in town with an appetite for helping old families through temporary weather." Sienna looked up sharply. Delia met her gaze and smiled as if sharing a joke. Later, in the corridor outside the drawing room, Delia caught Sienna alone. "You look exhausted," she said. "You always did insist on carrying things no one asked you to." "Say what you mean, Delia." Delia examined one perfect fingernail. "Only that people prefer a single, elegant story when disaster is near, not tangled versions involving impropriety." Sienna went cold. "Are you threatening me?" "Good heavens, no, advising you." Delia's eyes flicked toward the stair where Miriam had disappeared. "A rescuer must appear credible, cousin. Society is terribly old-fashioned about signatures." She swept away before Sienna could answer. That night, Sienna moved the ledger case from her wardrobe to the old steward's room, hidden inside the tin deed trunk under warped maps. She took only 1 set of cipher notes back to her room and stitched them into the lining of a winter petticoat with clumsy, furious stitches. At midnight, a light tap came at her door. She froze, then opened it to find Jonah in the passage, cap in hand. "Sorry," he whispered. "Didn't mean to startle you. Mr. Pike sent me for the stable key. Saw your lamp." She should have sent him away. Instead, she said, "Come in for a minute." He stood just inside the threshold, respectful distance, eyes taking in the open ledgers and her white face. "What happened?" he asked quietly. "Nothing I can prove." He waited. Words spilled before she could stop them. "If someone held medicine over your family, held it like a leash, what would you do?" His jaw tightened. "Break the hand holding it." "I can't." She gave a brittle laugh. "Not without breaking him too." For a moment he looked like he might step closer. Instead he said, "Then buy time. Quietly. Until you can cut the leash clean." She looked at him, at the steadiness that contained anger, the fact that he believed cutting free was possible. It hurt and helped in equal measure. "Thank you," she said. At the door he paused. "Whatever game they're playing upstairs, be careful." "You too," she said, and meant it more than she should. The answer came in 3 pieces over 48 hours. First, a wire from Hartwell and Price to Briar Hall proper, addressed to Miriam, but read by half the household before luncheon. Syndicate acknowledges receipt of interim remittance. Stop foreclosure. Action suspended. Pending execution of restructuring terms. Stop representative to attend for signatures. Saturday. Stop suspended. Not forgiven, not solved, but the blade lifted from the throat. Mrs. Grant in the kitchens cried openly. Mr. Pike swore he'd never doubted. At the mill, someone rang the noon bell twice. By afternoon, tenants were at the service yard with eggs, apples, awkward gratitude, relief turning faces years younger. Miriam accepted congratulations in the front hall with calm modesty. "A family effort," she said. Delia, in dove-grey silk despite the hour, stood at her shoulder and let people draw their own conclusions. Second, a note from Canterbury slipped to Sienna by the postboy when no one was looking. Framework accepted by lender council. Funds placed through intermediary account as instructed. C. Ash identity remains undisclosed. Exercise caution. Sienna read it twice and tucked it into her sleeve. Her hands shook so hard she had to sit down on the back stair. She had done it. Or rather, she and every risk she'd taken had done it. The bridge loan was live. Timber futures locked. Grazing auction terms recognized. Briar Hall would breathe for now. She went looking for Jonah with the absurd, urgent need to tell someone who knew the shape of the work. He was nowhere in the yard, nowhere by the drains, nowhere in the steward's room. His bunk in the gardener's loft was stripped, blanket folded, no note. "Reed?" Mr. Pike said when she asked. "Took his day wages at noon. Said he had business in town." Something in Sienna dropped hard. By evening, the hall was lit for what Miriam called a necessary supper. To reassure allies, she said, though it had become a celebration by momentum. Candles multiplied in sconces. Silver was polished. County names arrived in carriages, all velvet and rumour, and appetite for proximity to recovery. Sienna dressed because refusal would be noticed. Blue silk, as ordered. Hair pinned too tightly. She stood at the edge of the ballroom under the musicians' gallery and watched Delia receive compliments like rainfall. Near 9, the butler struck his staff for attention. "Lord Rowan Vale, Marquess of Briar Hall." The name moved through the room like wind through dry leaves. Sienna turned with everyone else. The man entering beneath the chandeliers wore black evening coat, white tie, and the quiet authority of someone accustomed to command being obeyed before it was fully spoken. Decorations glinted at his breast. Military honours she recognized from newspapers, from lists of the decorated returned. His hair was combed back, his jaw clean-shaven, his posture unmistakably the same. Jonah Reed looked straight at her from across the room. No, Lord Rowan Vale did. For one impossible second she could not connect the two images. Mud-streaked sleeves in the kitchen yard and polished boots on waxed parquet. Hands pulling tile from drains, and the signet ring catching candlelight as he removed his gloves. Then he bowed to Miriam, to Delia, to the assembled trustees. The floor seemed to tilt. Miriam stepped forward with gracious warmth Sienna had not seen in years. "My lord, Briar Hall welcomes you home." Rowan replied in that same voice she knew too well, now sharpened by rank instead of roughened by pretense. "Mrs. Clark, Miss Clark, Cousin Delia." Cousin. Delia dipped in a perfect curtsy, cheeks bright. "We are so honoured." Sienna could not move. Every conversation at dawn, every walk of boundaries, every practical exchange rose in her memory and changed shape all at once. He had known. He had stood in his own estate as a hired man and watched her fight for authority she did not possess, while he legally held all of it. Rowan's gaze returned to her. In his eyes she saw recognition, apology, and something like dread. Before either could speak, Hartwell and Price's representative, pink-faced and eager, approached with papers and congratulations. "My lord, fortunate timing. We've all been discussing the remarkable anonymous intervention. Most unusual. Saved us a tedious liquidation." A polite ripple of laughter. Rowan accepted the packet without looking away from Sienna. "Anonymous?" "So discreet," Delia said lightly, touching the stem of her glass. "In crises, one does what one can for family." The representative beamed. "Indeed, Miss Delia's resourcefulness has been much admired." Sienna stared at Delia, who did not look at her. Miriam's hand appeared at Sienna's elbow, fingers biting through silk. Her smile never shifted as she murmured, barely moving her lips. "You will say nothing. Toby's account is due Monday." Sienna's mouth went dry. Across the room, Rowan signed an acknowledgement, then turned back toward the guests. "Whoever acted," he said, voice carrying, "has my profound gratitude. Briar Hall stands because of uncommon courage." Delia lowered her eyes in practiced modesty. Several women exchanged approving glances. Sienna heard the sentence like a bell struck underwater. Music began again. Rowan crossed the floor and offered Delia his arm for the first dance, duty and gratitude shaping each formal step. Delia accepted, radiant. Applause followed, relieved and hungry for romance now that ruin had been postponed. At the edge of the ballroom, Sienna stood very straight and clapped with everyone else. Miriam's hand remained on her elbow, light as lace and hard as iron. Miriam's hand did not leave Sienna's arm until the dance ended. When Rowan returned Delia to the edge of the floor, the room broke into small, delighted clusters, people pretending to discuss weather while watching who stood nearest whom. Rowan said something low to Delia. She laughed and touched his sleeve, as if she'd always belonged there. Then his gaze found Sienna again. He took one step toward her. Miriam moved first, all gracious efficiency. "My lord, Lady Armitage has been asking after the roof plans. Sienna, dear, do fetch her shawl from the conservatory. At once." It was nonsense. Lady Armitage was wearing her shawl. Sienna held Rowan's eyes a second longer, then inclined her head and obeyed, because Toby's account was due Monday, and her mother had made obedience the price of his lungs. By the time she returned, Rowan was surrounded by trustees and the Hartwell and Price man. Delia stood at his right hand like a portrait already framed. By morning, the hall had turned the previous night into official story. The housemaid who brought hot water said, "They say Miss Delia wrote to London herself, miss. Clever thing." The undergardener in the yard said, "New Lord's found his match then." At breakfast, Miriam read a letter aloud from a county acquaintance praising Delia's uncommon intervention. Sienna sat with coffee gone cold and watched each lie settle into place like mortar. At 11, Hartwell and Price's representative arrived with 2 trustees and a solicitor's clerk to review stabilization options. The meeting was set in the library, where generations of men had made ruin sound like policy. Sienna entered with ledger books in her arms and was immediately checked by Miriam's voice. "Leave those, darling. Mr. Bell has volunteered to assist with the financial particulars." Mr. Bell was already there, smug and neat, one hand resting on paper that had been taken from Sienna's own reconciliation files. Delia sat beside Rowan in pale green silk, expression modest, eyes bright. Rowan looked from the ledgers in Sienna's hands to Miriam. "Miss Clark has managed the books these past years, has she not?" "Household books," Miriam said smoothly. "She is diligent, but easily overtired." The clerk smiled in the patronizing way of men who had never balanced a wage book in winter. "Quite. We'll keep to principal matters." Sienna set the ledgers down anyway. Principal matters include which covenants can be met without defaulting the bridge terms. The representative frowned. "Bridge terms?" Rowan's head turned sharply. "What bridge terms?" Delia answered before Sienna could breathe. "The temporary remittance structure, of course. Such dull details. I handled what was necessary through private channels." Handled. She said it like she had chosen ribbon. Sienna stepped forward. "If timber delivery is reduced below the contracted volume or if mill operations are suspended, the interim protections can be called in full." That was explicit. Mr. Bell gave a little laugh. "Speculation, Miss Clark." "It is not speculation. It is clause." Miriam cut across her. "Sienna has had very little sleep. I'll ask her to rest." Rowan's voice cool now. "No. Let her finish." For one dangerous second, relief flashed through her. She opened the top ledger, turned to the copied terms she had prepared from memory, and found the page gone, not torn, cut cleanly at the binding. She flipped 3 more sections. Missing. Gone. Gone. Her stomach dropped as if the floor had opened under her. Mr. Bell leaned back. "As you see." Delia sighed softly, almost pitying. "Cousin, you do get so attached to worst-case scenarios." The representative shuffled his papers. "In any event, the trustees have drafted a prudent fallback, sale of marginal tenant allotments, temporary closure of Briar Mill until spring, and consolidation of labour obligations." Sienna heard the words as blows. Marginal allotments were kitchen plots that kept families alive through January. Temporary mill closure meant workers gone now and, likely, never rehired once machinery sat idle. "No," she said. "That violates—" "Enough," Miriam said, low and sharp. Rowan looked unsettled, not convinced, but the room was already moving past her. Men discussing percentages, Delia nodding at appropriate intervals, Mr. Bell describing social confidence. Sienna stood at the edge of her own work being dismantled in front of her, and understood with cold precision that someone had gone through her ledgers before breakfast. If the fallback passed and C-Ash terms were breached, foreclosure would return with penalties. Not in 6 weeks. Faster. What she had built was not simply being ignored, it was being deliberately rerouted toward collapse. She went straight from the library to the old steward's room, skirt gathered in her fist, breath raw in her throat. The corridor was empty. The repaired lock hung twisted, splintered at the jamb. Inside, drawers stood open. Map tubes scattered. The tin deed trunk lay on its side, lid bent. Sienna dropped to her knees and pulled everything out anyway. Molded title packets, cracked survey rods, a dead mouse in old straw. No ledger case. No cipher sheets. No brokerage drafts she had hidden between 1908 rent rolls and drainage maps. Gone. For a moment she could only kneel there among dust and paper and hear blood pounding in her ears. Then she forced herself to search again, more methodically, because panic never balanced an account. Hearth ash, broken cabinet back. Under floorboard near the west wall where the wood bowed. Nothing. At the threshold, a soft scrape of shoe on stone. She looked up to find Delia watching from the corridor, gloved hands folded. "You really must stop crouching about in storerooms," Delia said. "It's very unflattering." Sienna rose slowly. "Where is it?" Delia tipped her head, smiling. "Where is what?" "You know exactly what." "I know this." Delia's voice lost its sweetness. "You are one accusation from being called unstable, jealous, and compromised with a servant under false pretenses. You have no signed authority, no witnesses anyone important will prefer, and, apparently," she let her gaze drift over the wrecked room, "no documents." Sienna moved toward her. "You stole from me." Delia didn't move. "I rescued the family narrative. Try to keep up." She stepped back into the corridor and added, almost lazily, "Oh, and Aunt Miriam says Dr. Fenton sent another invoice. Such unfortunate timing." Then she was gone. Sienna gripped the doorframe until the splintered wood bit her palm. By late afternoon, she had done 3 things in quick succession, each one failing. She sent a note to Rowan through the footman. Urgent, 10 minutes in the U-walk before dinner. Alone. No reply came. She went to the stable to take a trap herself to Tunbridge, meaning to reach Dr. Fenton with the only cash she could raise from pawnable jewellery. The groom, embarrassed and rigid, said, "Mrs. Clark gave strict orders, miss. No carriage released without her written pass." She tried the bank in the village with her aunt's brooch wrapped in cloth. The clerk examined it and said politely that without proof of independent account authority, he could offer only a humiliating fraction. Less than 1 week of Toby's treatment. When she returned at dusk, muddy and shaking, a letter waited on her desk in Dr. Fenton's hand. She broke the seal with numb fingers. Miss Clark, I regret to inform you that absent payment of outstanding balances by Tuesday at first post, I cannot continue, Mr. Tobias Clark's present regimen at current facility. I have delayed this action twice at your mother's request, but can no longer ethically carry costs. Tuesday at first post. She sat down hard on the edge of the bed. The room swam once and steadied. A real moment of doubt came then, blunt and ugly. Maybe Miriam was right. Maybe power was simply whoever could pay the invoice on time. Maybe she had confused cleverness with control, and people she loved would pay the price for her attempt to matter. A knock sounded. She didn't answer. The knock came again, gentler. Miss Clark. Jonah's voice, no. Rowan's voice lowered. She stared at the door and could not move for several breaths. Then she folded Dr. Fenton's letter shut, slid it under the blotter and said, "Come in." Rowan entered in shirt sleeves and waistcoat, formal coat gone, face drawn in a way the ballroom light had hidden. He closed the door behind him but stayed near it. "I got your note too late," he said. "I was with trustees." "You mean with Delia?" He flinched at the name. "Yes." Silence stretched. "I should have told you," he said at last. "From the start." "Which part? Your name? Your title? The part where I asked a labourer for help while the Marquis watched?" Colour rose high in his cheekbones. Not anger, shame. "All of it." Sienna laughed once, brittle. Conveniently timed honesty. "I know what it looks like. Do you?" She stepped toward him now, controlled only by exhaustion. "Today they moved to sell allotments and close the mill, terms I negotiated specifically to prevent that are being erased from record. My documents are gone, and every person in this house is congratulating Delia for work she did not do, while my brother's doctor threatens discharge." He stared at her. "Your brother—" "Don't." She pressed fingers to her temple. "I cannot do this with you unless you decide whether you want truth or comfort." Rowan held her gaze a long moment. "Truth." "Then hear it. Delia is lying. Miriam is coercing me, and if those fallback terms are signed, Briar Hall will be back under the syndicate's boot before Christmas." He looked like a man struck by invisible force. "Can you prove it?" The question was fair. It still hurt. "Not tonight," she said. He nodded once, jaw tight. "Then give me until morning." She almost said, "I don't have until morning." Instead she said, "Tuesday, first post." He frowned. "What happens Tuesday, first post?" She did not answer. Some humiliations still felt impossible to hand over. "Just, if you mean what you said in the ballroom about courage, don't sign anything Delia places in front of you." He opened his mouth as if to ask more, then closed it. "I won't." When he left, she leaned against the door and slid to the floor, too tired to cry. Rowan went straight to the old Marquis's study and locked it behind him. The room smelled of wax, leather, and a kind of inherited certainty he had never trusted. He set both hands on the desk and stood without moving until his breathing slowed. He had worn uniforms long enough to know how deception could save lives. He had also buried enough men to know deception always billed itself later, with interest. He had come to Briar Hall in workman's clothes because the estate reports from London had felt too clean, because stewards lied upward, because title made people perform competence while rot spread under floorboards. On campaign he had learned that you saw truth at ground level, in boots, in drains, in who worked, when no one watched. He had meant to stay 3 days. Then he had met Sienna in a rain-dark corridor counting roof leaks like losses she personally refused to abandon. He had stayed because she was the first person on his land who spoke in outcomes instead of optics. Stayed because in Dawn Mist above North Copse, she had argued for selective thinning and tenant fuel rights in the same breath, as if people and profit were not opposing columns. Stayed because being near her felt dangerously like hope in a place he had associated only with duty and ghosts. And he had still lied. He dropped into the chair and rubbed a hand over his face. In the war, hesitation had gotten men killed. Here, hesitation had let a false narrative harden around Delia, while Sienna stood silent and increasingly cornered. The silence itself should have told him more. Sienna was not timid. She was trapped. He opened the packet Hartwell and Price had given him and reread the restructuring acknowledgement. The remittance had come through an intermediary in Canterbury under a coded authorization. No direct name. But there were marks in the margin, tiny notations about timber sequencing and drainage access that matched comments he had heard in Sienna's voice on wet mornings in the field. Not Delia. Never Delia. A memory surfaced unwanted. Sienna on the slope at dawn, mud on her hem, saying, assessing what can be promised without lying. He swore softly. On the desk lay 3 invitations Delia had approved for a restoration gala in 2 nights' time. Trustees, clergy, county officials, selected tenants. Miriam's note attached in elegant hand. A public moment of unity would secure confidence. You might also settle personal matters. Speculation is becoming unhelpful. Settle personal matters. He understood the pressure encoded there. Marry gratitude. Ratify the story. Make stability visible even if built on theft. He pulled a blank card toward him and wrote to his solicitor in London. Delay any execution authorizing tenant sales or mill suspension until I countersign in person. Quietly verify source account of interim remittance. He sealed it, then sat with his hand on the wax as it cooled. Underneath anger, another fear moved. Older, harder to name. That he had become exactly what he despised. A man with rank mistaking proximity for knowledge, leaving a woman to absorb consequences while he performed control. By the time he rose, the house was past midnight. Outside, rain had started again. It was Tuesday morning. At breakfast, Miriam announced the gala as if unveiling spring flowers. Tomorrow evening, she said. A celebration of Briar Hall's rescue and future direction. Trustees will be present to witness the new plan. Delia smiled into her teacup. And perhaps 1 or 2 happy announcements. Mr. Bell added, public confidence thrives on clarity. Sienna met Rowan's eyes across the table. He gave no sign beyond the slightest tightening at the corner of his mouth. Before she could speak, the butler entered with a tray. Telegram for Miss Clark. Miriam held out her hand. I'll take it. It is addressed to me, Sienna said. Miriam's smile stayed fixed. Naturally, I shall read if it concerns household expenditure. She broke the seal before Sienna could cross the room. The pause was tiny, almost invisible. Then Miriam handed over the paper. From Tunbridge, she said lightly. How tedious. Sienna read, account unsettled. Stop regimen suspended today. Stop Mr. Tobias Clark. Transferred home care. Pending instructions. Stop Fenton. Transferred home care. Not tomorrow. Today. The room blurred at the edges. Toby could not survive winter at Briar without treatment. Everyone knew it, including Miriam. Rowan pushed back his chair. What is it? Sienna folded the telegram once, precisely, because if she didn't, she might tear it in half with her bare hands. My brother has been discharged. A flicker, real shock, crossed Rowan's face. Miriam set down her cup. A temporary inconvenience. If matters proceed smoothly tomorrow, I'm sure arrangements can be restored. There it was, not even hidden now. Sienna turned to her, voice low enough that only the table heard. You used him. I protected this family, Miriam said. Delia touched Rowan's sleeve, as if soothing him. This is exactly why we must avoid scandal, darling. Disorder harms everyone. Sienna stood so abruptly her chair scraped. Do not call him darling. The room went still. Miriam's tone sharpened to warning. Sienna. But Sienna was already moving, telegram in her fist, towards the door. She had one day before the gala, one day before trustees watched Delia bless the sale of people's homes, one day before Toby came back coughing blood into handkerchiefs in a house that had money for chandeliers and none for him. Behind her, Miriam's final move came like a thrown knife. If you make a scene tomorrow, she called, voice carrying down the corridor, I will swear you forged every document and acted in collusion with a servant to defraud the estate. With your brother now dependent on this roof, consider very carefully whether you wish to test me. Sienna stopped, hand on the carved banister, heart hammering against bone. In the silence that followed, no one spoke. The gala invitations were already on their way. The gala night came cold and clear, the rain finally spent, the sky hard as black glass above the lit windows of Briar Hall. By 7, carriages lined the drive. Trustees in dark coats, clergy in sober wool, county ladies jewelled and bright, and, at Rowan's instruction, tenant representatives from Cottage Row and the Mill Yard, awkward in their best jackets, but present. Sienna stood at the top of the service stair in plain dove grey, not silk. Her brother's telegram folded in her pocket and a weight in her gloved hands. A small black ledger case, brass corners dulled, lock intact. She had found it at dawn, not by luck, by arithmetic. Delia's rooms were too obvious. Her trunks had already been moved to the blue guest suite nearest Miriam. Too exposed. The old steward's room had been ransacked in haste, but only one map tube left mud from the boot room chalk near the east courtyard. Chalk led to carriage storage. Carriage storage held coal bins, and behind the third coal bin sat the case wrapped in a stable blanket, hidden from fire and eyes alike. Delia had stolen it, then hidden it, where no lady would ever be seen searching. Sienna had knelt in coal dust with a hatpin, 2 screw nails and steady hands she barely recognized as her own. It took 14 minutes to lift the lock. Inside lay months of her life. Brokerage drafts, coded copies, lease terms, and, tucked between timber schedules, the letter Miriam had intercepted and annotated in her own hand before returning a copy to the outgoing tray by mistake. A mistake Sienna had once called luck. Tonight, she called it evidence. She tucked the case beneath a serving table near the ballroom entrance, where she could reach it when needed, and walked into the light. Music moved across the ballroom, polished and indifferent. Rowan stood beneath the chandeliers in formal black, every inch the Marquis people expected. Delia glittered at his side in ivory satin, smiling at congratulations she had not earned. Miriam watched Sienna from the edge of the room, expressions smooth, eyes warning. When speeches began, Hartwell and Price's representative praised resilience and prudent intervention. Mr. Bell spoke of confidence and market sentiment. Delia received applause simply by lowering her lashes at the right time. Then Rowan stepped forward. Briar Hall, he said, voice carrying to the gallery, has survived because someone took extraordinary risk on its behalf when failure seemed simpler. Tonight is meant to mark restoration. It should also mark commitment. A hush fell, expectant. Sienna felt her heart beat in her throat. She did not move. Rowan turned to Delia and offered his hand. Delia placed her fingers in his with practiced grace and stepped beside him, radiant with triumph. "Miss Delia Hartwell," Rowan said, each word deliberate. "In gratitude, in respect, and in hope for Briar Hall's future, will you marry me?" A collective intake of breath. Then delighted murmurs, rustle of skirts, smiles breaking everywhere. Delia's eyes flashed once towards Sienna before she answered. "Yes, my lord, with all my heart." Applause thundered. Glasses lifted. Miriam closed her eyes briefly, as if in prayer answered. Sienna stood very still and let it happen. Because 1 minute later, Delia took the silver pen from the trustee's folder and said, in a bright voice meant to carry, "As first practical step, we should confirm the fallback plan immediately. Sale of underperforming allotments and temporary mill closure. One must be firm, even in celebration. There, public, binding if countersigned." Sienna moved. She crossed the floor before anyone understood where she was going, reached beneath the side table, and set the black ledger case on the signing stand with a hard, audible click. "Before any signature," she said, clear enough to reach the back wall, "the room should know whose plan this actually is." Silence dropped like a curtain. Delia's smile held, barely. "Cousin, this is not the moment." "It is the only moment." Sienna slid a key from her glove, opened the case, and turned it so trustees could see. "These are the original brokerage drafts, remittance instructions, and restructuring clauses submitted under the correspondent name C. Ash." Miriam stepped forward sharply. "Close that case at once." "No." Sienna lifted the top document. "Banbury and Hale Timber Futures, executed 6 weeks ago. Signed receiving marks from their office and matching telegraph code on file." She passed it to Reverend Pritchard, nearest and trustworthy by habit, if not courage. "Read the date." He squinted. "September 18th. She took another sheet. "Canterbury Lease Restructuring Framework. Clause 4 prohibits tenant allotment sale and mill suspension during bridge period. Delia's fallback plan breaches this and triggers immediate call on arrears." Hartwell's representative frowned and reached for the paper. "Let me see that." Delia's composure cracked at the edges. "These could be copied from anywhere." "Then let us test them." Sienna drew out a folded card, thin and worn. "Cipher key used in every C. Ash wire. Secondary key is in my hand-sewn petticoat lining. Removed this afternoon in Mrs. Grant's kitchen with 2 witnesses." A ripple moved through the crowd, half scandal, half fascination. Miriam's voice sharpened. "You are embarrassing yourself." Sienna did not look at her. "No, Mother, I'm ending this." She lifted one final letter, cream paper gone soft at the folds. "And this is your handwriting in the margin of my intercepted draft. Destroy and redirect. Bell must be secured before Monday physician account." Miriam went white, then cold. "Forgery." Sienna turned to the room. "I expected that claim. So here is Dr. Fenton's telegram received this morning. My brother discharged after non-payment. Payment withheld to coerce my compliance and silence." Gasps, louder now. The tenant men near the back shifted, anger visible. Rowan had not moved since Sienna stepped forward. Now he reached for the telegram with a hand that was suddenly not steady. Delia spoke quickly, voice rising. "She is distraught. She became infatuated with a gardener and fabricated this entire fantasy when corrected." "You mean Lord Rowan disguised as a gardener?" Sienna cut in, and the room jolted. "A fact you used when useful and erased when not." All heads swung to Rowan. He met them without flinching. "I worked here under assumed identity." "That part is true. Continue, Miss Clark." "Miss Clark. Publicly. Formally." Sienna laid out 3 documents in a precise row. These drafts bear my cipher marks, my calculations and correction notations from field surveys, mister. Reed witnessed at dawn in North Copse. Notations repeated in the final contract, including wagon load limits at wet track threshold. Delia could not have written them. She wasn't here. Delia snapped. You have no proof of where I was. Sienna looked directly at her. Bath Assembly Rooms, September 21st. You sent me a card about ribbon colours while I negotiated timber volume with London. A few people laughed before catching themselves. Delia flushed crimson. You spiteful... I am accurate. Enough, Miriam said, stepping between Sienna and the trustees as if sheer will could retake the room. My daughter is unwell. She has always been... imaginative. This spectacle will end now. She reached for the case. Sienna closed it and held it against her chest. No, you don't touch this again. Miriam's mask broke at last. Do you think a handful of papers changes anything? Legally, you are nothing here. No signing authority. No standing. A child with arithmetic. Sienna's voice dropped, dangerous in its calm. Then hear arithmetic. If Delia signs this fallback tonight, Clause 4 defaults, the syndicate calls arrears plus penalty, and by December tenants are turned out. If the original terms stand, the estate remains solvent through spring cut. You can insult me as long as you like, but numbers do not bruise. Hartwell's representative, face now blotchy for a different reason, skimmed the restructuring clause and swore under his breath. These protections are real. Why in God's name were we given alternate recommendations? Mr. Bell tried to recover ground. Because prudent governance requires flexibility. Prudent governance, Sienna said, does not involve stealing correspondence and threatening medical care to force an engagement. The representative looked at Miriam. Mrs. Clark, were you aware of these documents? Miriam lifted her chin. I managed a volatile household. Hard choices were necessary. Reverend Pritchard stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. By starving your son's treatment? It was temporary leverage. The words landed like a slap. From the back of the room came a ragged cough. Heads turned. Toby stood in the doorway, too thin in an overlarge coat, one hand braced on the frame. Mrs. Grant hovered behind him, frightened and furious. I'm not leverage, he said hoarsely. Sienna's breath caught. Toby! He shook his head, eyes on Miriam. You told Dr. Fenton to hold invoices if Sienna resisted because a week without specialist nonsense will teach perspective. I heard you on the telephone in August. Miriam's face hardened into stone. You are feverish. Go upstairs. No. He coughed again, doubled briefly, then straightened with stubborn effort that looked painfully like Sienna. She kept me alive, not you. Rowan moved then, stepping beside Sienna, not in front of her. Trustees, he said, voice like iron. You have heard sufficient. Delia grasped his sleeve. Rowan, don't be absurd. This is hysteria staged by servants and invalids. He removed her hand gently, decisively. My proposal is withdrawn. The room exploded. Whispers, exclamations, outrage. Delia recoiled as if struck. You can't withdraw it in public. I just did. Miriam rounded on him. You owe this family. I owe Briar Hall truth, Rowan said. And Briar Hall was saved by Miss Sienna Clark. He turned to the assembled guests, every syllable carrying. Not by ornament, not by convenience, by intellect, labour and risk undertaken while others demanded her silence. No one applauded this time. They were too busy recalculating every opinion they had held for months. Hartwell's representative cleared his throat, rattled. Given probable fraud and coercion, no fallback instrument can be accepted tonight. All contested documents will be placed under trustee seal immediately. Do it, Rowan said. Sienna handed the case over herself, watching until the red wax set on the clasp. Miriam stood rigid, breathing fast, eyes bright with hatred and something like disbelief. That force had finally met a wall. Delia's voice went thin and frantic. "You cannot let her ruin us over accountancy." Sienna looked at her, exhausted and very steady. "You ruined yourself when you mistook my silence for surrender." The ballroom emptied in clumps of shock and gossip. By midnight, the musicians were gone, candles burned down, and Briar Hall smelled of wax, wilted roses, and aftermath. In the small morning room, Sienna sat beside Toby on the sofa while Dr. Fenton, summoned back by express rider at Rowan's expense and signed under Rowan's authority, not Miriam's, listened to Toby's chest. "Lungs are angry," the doctor muttered, "but he's not beyond recovery if we restart immediately." Sienna closed her eyes once, relief so sharp it hurt. Across the room, trustees spoke in low tones over sealed packets. Mr. Bell had left by side door without saying goodnight to anyone. Delia had locked herself in her room and refused broth. Miriam demanded legal counsel and was told she would have it, under supervision. When Dr. Fenton finished, Toby caught Sienna's hand. "Sorry I walked in like theatre." She laughed weakly. "You always did love an entrance." He squeezed once. "Proud of you." The words almost undid her. Rowan waited until the doctor left, then approached with careful distance, as if unsure he had any right to cross the carpet between them. "The trustees will remain through mourning," he said quietly. "No one touches your records without your presence." Sienna nodded, too tired for anything larger. He looked at Toby. "Your care account is guaranteed by a state reserve beginning now, in writing, not revocable by household discretion." Toby blinked at him. "Thank you, my lord." Rowan's gaze shifted back to Sienna. "I should have done more sooner." "You did enough tonight," she said, and surprised herself by meaning it. Not forgiveness, not yet, but not nothing. When he left, dawn was beginning at the window, pale and uncertain. 3 days later, the library smelled of ink and legal paper instead of perfume. Miriam sat at the far end of the table with her solicitor, face composed but bloodless. Delia sat beside her in travelling clothes, eyes swollen, jaw set in stubborn fury. Between them and the trustees lay the opened ledger case, documents sorted and indexed in Sienna's hand. "Read back finding 2, Trustee Ellery said to the clerk. The clerk adjusted spectacles. "Misrepresentation of financial agency by Miss Delia Hartwell with intent to influence estate governance decisions. Attempted execution of fallback plan contrary to active restructuring covenants." Finding 3. Interference with correspondence and coercive threat regarding medical payments by Mrs. Miriam Clark. Miriam's solicitor objected to wording. He was overruled. Sienna did not gloat. She sat upright at the opposite side, pages marked in neat tabs, answering questions with dates and amounts. Every time someone tried to blur sequence, she pulled a reference and pinned it cleanly to record. When Delia attempted tears, then indignation, then charm, Sienna answered each with evidence. "You cannot prove I opened that case," Delia snapped. "You don't need to have opened it to steal it," Sienna said. "Footman Lark testified you ordered carriage storage cleared at midnight. For mice. We have his statement." Delia glared. "Servants lie." "Not when 3 tell the same lie with matching times." Miriam made one last play near noon. "My daughter is vindictive," she said coolly. "This is retaliation for a marriage arrangement she disliked. Hardly grounds to strip household authority." Sienna took out the final sheet she had held back. The trust addendum her father's sister had filed, buried in old packets and recovered from the steward room weeks earlier. She slid it across. "Clause 7, she said. Control of my inheritance reverts immediately if current guardian is found to have used beneficiary assets or related accounts for coercion or fraudulent concealment. Trustee signatures attached. Miriam read it once and went very still. Trustee Ellery cleared his throat. In light of findings, Mrs. Clark is removed from all financial authority at Briar Hall, pending further review. Miss Clark's inheritance control transfers to independent trustee administration, effective today. Miriam lifted her eyes to Sienna, expressions stripped bare for the first time in Sienna's life. Rage, yes, but underneath it a hollow she did not know how to fill without control. You think this makes you safe? Miriam said softly. Sienna met her gaze. No, it makes me free. Delia laughed sharply, near hysteria. Free to do what? Count turnips? Sienna closed the ledger. Sign. By evening, Delia had signed repayment terms for misappropriated and falsely claimed funds under trustee supervision. She left Briar Hall 2 mornings later in a hired carriage, curtains drawn, no one on the steps to wave. Miriam did not leave at once. There were legal formalities, but her ring of keys was surrendered to Mrs. Grant before supper. Each key set on the tray with a metallic finality that echoed down the hall. A week after the hearing, Rowan asked Sienna to meet him in the old steward's room. It looked different now. Windows repaired, shelves righted, records aired and stacked by category with chalk labels in her hand. No mildew smell. No hidden traps. Rowan stood by the desk, where she had once balanced impossible sums by candlelight. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I asked you here, he said, because this room is where you did the work no one saw. I think anything I say ought to be said here. Sienna folded her arms, waiting. He did not begin with apology. He began with fact. I deceived you. I told myself I was gathering truth before taking command. Partly true, also cowardice. It was easier to be Jonah Reed with you than Rowan Vale with everyone else demanding answers. She watched him, expression unreadable. He went on, voice roughening. In uniform, I learned to hide rank when it got men killed. At home, I used the same habit to hide from responsibility I didn't trust myself to carry. You paid the price for that choice. Silence. Then Sienna said, Thank you for saying it plainly. He exhaled once, as if he had been braced for impact. I am sorry, Sienna. Not for being found out, for doing it. Something in her face softened. Not much. Enough. He stepped closer, set a folder on the desk, and slid it toward her. This is an appointment instrument. Estate Director, Briar Hall. Full authority over accounts, contracts, wage schedules, tenant lease administration, and capital planning. Dual sign protocol with me for land sales only. Everything else in your signature. She stared at him. You're offering me a position. I'm asking you to take the position you already earned. And if I decline, then I will hire whomever you recommend and likely fail by spring. A small, unwilling smile touched her mouth and vanished. Rowan's gaze held hers. I want to ask for more. I don't get to yet. So this is what I can ask honestly. Be my partner in running Briar Hall. If, one day, you can trust me enough for the rest, then I'll ask that too. Properly. No audience, no debt. For a long moment, the only sound was a cart rattling in the courtyard below. Sienna opened the folder and read line by line, because that was who she was. Clause language tight. Authority clear. Revocation protections explicit. Compensation fair and transparent. Not romance disguised as employment. Respect. Written. She picked up the pen from the desk, then paused. One amendment. His brows lifted. Name it. Medical reserve for dependent family and estate workers, protected from discretionary holdbacks by household members, including you. He nodded immediately. Done. She wrote the amendment in clean script, initialed it, and signed beneath, Sienna Clarke. Her own name where it mattered. When she looked up, Rowan was smiling with something like wonder. Director Clarke, "Don't overuse it," she said, and this time the smile stayed. Late spring brought rain again, but no bowls in the corridor. In the mill yard, the wheel turned full and loud, spray bright in sunlight. Sienna stood with the foreman over wage tables while workers queued, caps in hand, names called, payments signed in ink. She had reconciled herself. No delays, no polite lies. "Morning, Director," Mrs. Della said, accepting her envelope. "Heard we keep our allotment another year." 3 years if rotation holds, Sienna said. "And we've approved chimney repairs before November." Mrs. Della blinked, then grinned. "Well now." At noon, Toby sat on a bench near the kitchen wall, wrapped in a blanket, despite the warmth, reading and occasionally coughing, but with colour returning to his face. Dr. Fenton's invoices arrived directly to Estate Medical Reserve. Paid every Thursday. No negotiation, no leverage. Miriam passed through the hall that afternoon with 2 trunks and 1 maid, bound for a smaller house in Cheltenham arranged by her solicitor. She paused by the front door, where Sienna happened to be reviewing roofing accounts. For a heartbeat, mother and daughter regarded each other in the filtered light. "You always were stubborn," Miriam said. Sienna kept her pencil on the page. "I always was practical." Miriam's mouth tightened at her own old word. Then she left without another sentence. Delia sent 1 letter from London requesting social references. Sienna forwarded it to trustees without comment. By midsummer, Briar Hall's kitchen garden had gone wild in the best way. Espalier pears heavy on the wall, lavender buzzing, rows of beans climbing taut strings. Evening laid gold across the paths. Sienna was tying up tomato vines when footsteps sounded on gravel behind her. She turned, already smiling before she meant to. Rowan stood with no coat, sleeves rolled, looking suddenly like both men she knew, Marquis and gardener. Finally, one person. "In need of labour?" he asked. "Can you thatch?" "Badly first day, passably second." She laughed, the old line landing between them like a bridge. He came closer, then stopped at arm's length. No audience, just bees and warm earth, and the faint clatter of supper pans through the open kitchen window. "Sienna Clarke," he said quietly. "Months ago, I asked the wrong woman for the wrong reasons in the wrong room. I'm here to do one part correctly." He drew a small ring from his pocket, not ostentatious, a clear stone in old gold. "I love you," he said, with no flourish to hide behind. "Not because you saved Briar Hall, though you did. Because you tell truth when it costs you. Because you make plans that include people everyone else writes off. Because when I am with you, duty stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like work worth doing." His voice unsteady now, honest enough to shake. "I cannot undo what I did. I can promise this. No lies between us, no decisions about your life made over your head, no use of love as leverage. Will you marry me?" Sienna looked at him a long time, eyes bright but steady. "Before I answer," she said, "say my title." A flicker of confusion, then understanding. He smiled. "Director Clarke," he said solemnly, "will you marry me?" She stepped forward and took the ring from his hand, held it a moment in her palm. "Yes," she said, "I will." When he kissed her, it was gentle first, then fierce with relief, held too long. Somewhere behind them, a kitchen maid cheered and immediately pretended she had dropped a pan. They broke apart, laughing, foreheads touching. "Properly done," he murmured. "Correct, woman," she said. "Correct reasons." He slid the ring onto her finger. Above them, clouds gathered again over Briar Hall. A soft rain began, pattering over leaves, over repaired slate, over a house still old and imperfect and no longer drowning. Later, in the west corridor, Sienna paused beside the place where copper bowls had once lined the wall. The plaster was patched, the roof sound, the floor dry. She opened the new estate ledger on the hallway table, dipped her pen, and signed the week's disbursement order with a hand that did not tremble. Sienna Clark Vale, estate director. Rain kept time on the roof, steady, patient, no longer winning.